And welcome to our Friday morning of the NECTA convention. And once again, we'd like to thank all of our supporters, particularly our sponsors, who you can see the banners around the room, and our exhibitors. And we look forward to a wonderful day of programming once again. I'd like to turn it over to Peter Howe from Dentaline. Peter has a long and distinguished career of in the media, particularly when he was and for this panel in particular, when he was at NECN, he hosted the CEO Roundtable. With that, I'll kick it over to Peter. We look forward to this great conversation.
Good morning, Tim, and thank you. And thank you for turning on the microphones. Let me say, first of all, huge props to everybody who has showed up here at 8 a.m. Friday. You are the NECTA elite, and everybody is noticing, and there will be special prizes for everybody who showed up after the clam bake last night. So we're looking forward to a great C-suite conversation. And let me first introduce, as you look up from left to right, Dave Petricca, who's the Chief Financial Officer with NBC Sports Group, Dale Artizone with INSP, and Stan Hubbard with Reels. And I'm going to kick it off with everybody getting a chance to talk a little bit about some of the cool things upcoming this fall on their respective networks. As we were saying ahead of time, there's so much great television these days. Nobody can keep track of it, much less watch it all. So I thought maybe we'd start with Dave. I know Indy racing is coming to NBC Sports. What else is?
Yeah, so that's a little later than this fall. It's next season, but we're looking forward to it. Iconic property in the Indy 500. We have about half of IndyCar right now. We made a deal recently to consolidate the whole package. I think it's been on ABC for over 60 years. So these iconic events don't change hands very often, so we're really excited about that. But you know, it's not necessarily a new thing I'm looking forward to, but you know, I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens with football ratings this year. Obviously, that's a huge part of our business. The last few years, you know, have been a lot of things have gone on with the NFL, but you know, it remains one of the biggest properties in TV, and we think it's poised for a bounce back. But I think that's probably the biggest thing I'm looking forward to.
Excellent. And I know of great interest to a lot of people in this audience, October, I think 17 will be the one-year anniversary of Comcast Sportsnet New England becoming NBC Sports Boston. What if you can just say a little about what you've been trying to do with infusing the NBC brand there?
Yeah, so you know, it's over 7 years ago now that the Comcast NBCU transaction took place, and you know, sports was one of the divisions of NBC that really changed when that deal happened. And you know, a lot of sports assets were actually owned by Comcast prior to the deal. NBC Sports was just a few hours on Saturday and Sunday afternoons. So overnight, we became a powerhouse with the regional sports networks, Versus, which became NBC Sports Network, the Golf Channel. So over time, you know, there's been a lot of integration that's taken place. You know, consistent branding across all of our assets, you know, frankly, programming and talent that we're able to utilize both nationally and regionally. And over that time, you know, Comcast became less of the consumer brand as Xfinity began to take the lead. And, you know, it became clear that like Comcast as a consumer brand made a lot less sense to viewers than NBC Sports did. And so we felt, and it was not an opinion universally shared between New York and Philadelphia, I'll say. It was a hard one. It took a lot of persuasion, but finally—
New York 1, Philadelphia 0.
Yeah, although, you know, the 6 years prior to a year ago, I would say it was 6-1 Philadelphia. But a year ago, we thought that it finally made sense to align the consumer-facing brands, and, you know, I think it's gone really well. And you know, it makes more sense now to the audience when there's NBC Sports Boston talent that shows up on NBC Sports Network, or vice versa, or there's programming that we leverage nationally that you see on NBC Sports Boston. So I think it's been really successful.
great. So Dale Artizone, INSP, home to some great shows like the Cowboy Way, State Plate, where you've been to all 50 states, including Rhode Island, and here's the iconic meal from that state. I know some big news there is Dale and Bubba and Booger are moving to Sunday night.
Well, actually, it's Cody, Bubba, and Booger, but I'm happy to move to Sunday as well. Now, so we're very excited about the Cowboy Way, which, as many of you may know, Westerns have really taken off on INSP, and we're fascinated ourselves sometimes when we see ratings come in for shows that are iconic, that have been around a while, but still really resonate. So part of our strategy has been to expand that into what we call Western adjacent and look for shows that are somewhat complementary of that, but also bring in a bit of a younger audience. And so the Cowboy Way is one of those shows, features 3 millennial cowboys and their wives and their family, and how they go about making a cattle business thrive in this day and age. And so we're into our 4th season. We're going to move it to Sunday nights. It seems like a great fit for Sunday nights. Viewership has increased every year. And so is kind of the drama that involves them. So we're excited about that. As you mentioned, thank you, State Plate is a show that we do with Taylor Hicks. He will complete his 50-state tour this year. Starts with Hawaii in our season premiere in August, and then we'll wrap up with Tennessee. So those are 2 in particular that we're real excited about as we go into the fall.
Saving the best for last with Hawaii and Tennessee.
That's right.
Great. Stan, how about at Reels? I know there's a Kitty Kelly series coming up with a lot of interesting celebrity gossip and some interesting broken, famous, the Stalker Files, a lot of interesting, quirky celebrity shows.
Well, it's a really exciting time to be an independent network because I look at the posters around here and I think it's dominated by the independents supporting these regional cable operations and trying lots of things new. Whether it's some of the things you're doing at Inspiration, you look at what Ovation's doing with its Arts in the Heartland program, really touching communities. We've made a commitment at Reels over the last couple of years to be a fully original network, and we're now over 93%. And we found a sweet spot for us, which is kind of that crossroads where scandal, death, bad behavior meets celebrity. And series like Autopsy, which what you learn about a celebrity's life through their death, the last 24 hours of their life, because all these autopsies are public records, and whether it's Robin Williams or Prince, and it's fascinating insight into these people. But we do have some really new things coming up as we start inching up on being 100% original. The Kitty Kelly special that you mentioned. We have a show right now that's we're really excited about called Breaking the Band, which is kind of the inside stories of how these bands broke up, whether it's Fleetwood Mac or Van Halen or even the Beatles, and that's doing well for us. There's a few more things that are in the queue to announce, but it's an exciting time to be a independent network and to be trying to do the cutting edge when I think a lot of the big companies and the big conglomerates are kind of figuring out where the future is. We're just doing it and doing it every day and trying to support our partners who make it possible for us, the cable operators, and come up with ideas, and we're happy to support them.
The thought occurred to me that with Reels, your advertising in Boston could be the dark side of celebrity, the wicked dark side.
Some of the things, you think of a show like Autopsy, and it sounds dark. It's not dark at all. It's very light. I should say bright. It's heavy topics, obviously, but it's really amazing what you learn about some of these things and these psychological profiles. But one of the things that we do is on systems that were carried universally in a decent channel position, we spend a large proportion of our fee on marketing with those systems. And it's worked, and some of those systems were a top 40 network.
And that is absolutely something I want to come back to, the partnership between programmers and networks and really making that work. I think what's really front and center probably for everybody in this industry these days is it just feels like everything is in flux. And there's this sense that what I grew up thinking of as television programming, people want to watch more and more on anything but a television. So let's spend some time digging into that, sort of how you're seeing that dynamic play out with your networks and some of the ways that you're seeking to respond to that. Maybe let's start with Dave.
Yeah. So for me, I guess we're kind of lucky that we have like one of the last things that really makes sense live. So when the game ends, a lot of people aren't going to go watch, what just happened, the next day. So, I think I'd like to think we're a really big part of the value proposition to, maintain the traditional bundle. And when I look back over the last 6 months, we've had frankly the busiest 6 months we've ever had, in terms of the fact that we had the Super Bowl and the Olympics within 3 weeks of each other. And I can tell you, we learn a lot through these massive events, and the traditional television linear audience continues to be the biggest audience with the biggest reach, the biggest revenue stream. If you didn't know anything about this industry and you just read some of the coverage, you'd think that like digital viewing, multi-platform viewing, is equal to or greater than the traditional audience or traditional TV viewing. And at least from where I sit, it was more than 95% of our audience for those two events came via traditional linear television stream. Now,
Wow. So 95% of the audience, 95% of the revenues, both?
Yeah, a little bit less. Honestly, the revenue over-indexes a bit on digital, but the majority of our digital viewing was through MVPD authenticated. For those two events, it was 100%. They're just not available outside of the bundle. We have some other products that are direct to consumer that, frankly, we view as complementary because they serve audiences that can't get the coverage on television. Like, for example, right now we're in the middle of the Tour de France, and cycling is a niche sport with a small group of junkie superfans that are willing to pay for a product that gives them enhanced statistics, more coverage than we could ever fit on TV. But I honestly don't think that does anything to the audience on TV. It complements our TV coverage, and I think we see that in the ratings. So, I can't say that strategy is, universally adopted in the industry. ESPN and Fox and some of our other competitors have a different point of view about it, but we think it's really important not to cannibalize our traditional audience by putting everything up digitally, not outside of the TV bundle.
Right, and of course, to state the blindingly obvious, having exclusive control over content and you decide when and how it airs is obviously a wonderful option that doesn't exist in news or...
Yeah, no, and it doesn't even exist universally within sports. We're very fortunate. We've had a strategy to own properties exclusively. So if you think about the Olympics, you think about the NHL, you think about the English Premier League, if you're fans of those sports, you have to have our platforms or our channels to get to them. If you think about like college sports, like regular season college basketball, and you were to turn on, your TV on any February afternoon, there's like 30 or 40 games on at the same time. So I would say like all properties and all sports rights aren't created equal, but we're very fortunate, and we've had a strategy to pursue rights exclusively where we can.
Right. Dale and Stan, obviously feature programming, a very different world from sports, but you clearly are thinking, just as creatively about different ways to represent, slice up, repurpose the content that you're creating, it sounds like.
We are. Look, the challenge for us is that our viewers are generally 50 plus. So in many ways, we are, the classic linear retention network. That might be a tagline for us because our viewers do not cut the cord. They love watching us on linear. If I were to say we're available on Roku, they would think we're probably a topping to spaghetti sauce or something. They don't function that way. So we're mindful of that, but to your point, when we look at our original content, part of what we try to do is create content that you can dice up and you can push to some of these other platforms, maybe in shorter segments, because a lot of the content that's viewed on the mobile devices is going to be in shorter periods of time, and so we want the linear experience, despite what a lot of the apocalyptic warnings we get. you know, the reality is it is still a very traditional way to watch television. And as viewers age, you know, technology always ages up. And so, yes, a younger audience is clearly looking, you know, the audience now walks out of Best Buy with a television in one hand and, you know, the Apple and the iPod and everything else. But we still see a number of people who look to that more traditional linear viewership. And so our strategy is to find content that works well on all those platforms.
And when you say, just to stick with that for 1 second, have there been particular versions of slicing and dicing, or taking, you know, 2 minutes or 8 minutes or 5 minutes out of a 30-minute program? Are there versions of that that you find work especially well?
There are. So we did a show called Handcrafted America, and we hosted by Jill Wagner, and she went and covered different segments of people who made things by hand, and it might be, you know, threading a saddle with the rivets or what have you. Well, that's a show that's a half-an-hour show. She featured 3 different artisans, so we can dice that up into 8 minutes, and we found success with that. But the other thing that has worked well for us is segments either include clips of shows, but supporting parts. So we have our 3 cowboys who will do what we call fireside chats, where they may sit around the fire and kind of opine on life and their philosophies about being a cowboy. And that is something we can put on digital to complement either before or after an episode, but it can be viewed in, you know, 5 to 8 minutes.
Great. And Stan, how about at Reels? What are some of the ways that you're making efforts to serve these other platforms?
Well, I hear Dave's live model, and I think we might have to figure out how to do the autopsies live.
Viewer discretion advised.
I would watch that.
You know, our focus is getting to be 100% original, and we're doing that with series and primarily hour-long episodes. We want to be supportive of our traditional distributors. Clearly, we look at other means. Who knows where the future's taking us? We want to be there, but we're not doing a lot of slicing and dicing. You know, in our programs, if an episode can't have 3 or 4 moments where the viewer says, "Huh, we're not doing our job," and if you take those 3 or 4 moments out and slice and dice them, you kind of kill the whole show and give the tagline. But we look at how do we support things that our traditional distributors are pushing into. Obviously, things like VOD and trying to be as helpful as we can be. But the reality is our viewership is linear. People find our network. The better channel position we're in, the better we do. And we just keep doing more and more.
One of my past careers, newspaper business, they used to talk about going from print dollars to digital pennies. And I just wonder if you could talk at a high level about how you see those numbers comparing and the trends over time with, you know, what you're getting for the 15-second ad before the thing you watch on the internet versus over the air.
Yeah, I think the digital model really changed, actually. I think that was completely true when digital was a separate and discrete business. You know, when digital was display and, you know, the majority of the consumption was people reading articles. You know, our primary digital business is authenticated streaming. And so we actually see a convergence between television and digital. And our digital programs, you know, our TV programs have the same sort of ad load, and we do dynamic ad insertion. So we actually get premiums on our CPMs on digital because there's an ability to target better than on linear TV. But you know, the convergence every year that goes by is more and more, and I think the bigger challenge we have is around measurement at this point. As connected TV devices continue to penetrate more and more, it really is just a TV product. I mean, the majority of our digital viewing last year, you know, over 40% of our NFL viewing was on connected TVs, which, you know, somebody's sitting there with their Apple TV and they'd rather have the experience of watching, you know, Sunday Night Football on the NBC Sports Live app, which, you know, from the standpoint of the MVPD ecosystem is not a bad thing because you have to have a cable subscription to get it. The challenge is managing the press story because you don't measure the digital audience the same way. It doesn't get humed into the rating. It's complicated. Nielsen has not figured out a really reliable way to capture those viewers that are watching on connected TVs or devices. And so when you read about, again, the NFL ratings being down 10%, it doesn't always capture all the different ways people are consuming. So I think from a monetization standpoint, it's not a bad thing at all for us. Like, it's actually been a good thing. But it's just the managing the narrative, broadly in the press is the bigger challenge at this point.
Yeah. I was going to follow up with Dale, not to ask you to give away trade secrets, but if you're talking about the balance between, what did you say, original linear retention network? That's your new tagline?
Wow. I haven't cleared that with my boss yet, so we'll see how that goes. I may be going to Hawaii for that state plate premiere.
If you're talking about looking at the next 3 to 5 years, sort of how big a part you think digital slicing and dicing, off TV presentation will be, do you have a sense of how big a part of the business you want that to be, expect it can be?
Well, I mean, look, for us, the traditional linear model is the revenue engine. And so, it's the advertising that brings in the revenue. And, we want to be careful we don't segment our audience to the point where we have diminishing returns. And so we're looking to find a balance that drives the viewership, but it doesn't overpass it. So for us, our best advertising is either going to be promotions on the network or cross-channel promotions off network. That seems to drive our viewers. And then we've been strategic in digital. So we've tried a few different things, but again, where our audience is in terms of demographics, Facebook has been the strongest. And we've got 2+ million subscribers, and that allows us to do a lot of segmented marketing, targeted marketing, and that's been very successful for us.
I mean, so it sounds like there's sort of next to no cannibalization. I mean, there's almost nobody who's not watching INSP on TV because they've seen something online.
I mean, that's been our sense so far. What we're obviously being strategic, we're trying to look 3, 5, 7 years ahead and see where that's going to go. And we want to be there when that moves, but be mindful of the revenue implications. Because right now, there's a lot of different digital options, not a lot that compete revenue-wise with traditional linear.
Great. Stan, I'd love to ask you, and then maybe bring it back this way as well. Any ways in which you've seen the whole non-TV platform digital thing be overhyped, or ways in which you feel like it's an overstated trend, or people are making assertions that kind of outrun reality in terms of TV video viewing behavior?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways we've seen it overhyped, and you can look at a lot of the digital entries that have come and gone. Those that invest in real programming, which is television, which is what viewers watch, like a Netflix, are thriving. And I think those that are trying to do it a different way, the jury's way out on them. You look at some of the more successful OTT, the bigger ones, I'll use the national ones, whether it's a DirecTV Now, a Dish Sling product. That's television the way we know it. And those are the ones that seem to be thriving. Are there new ways that people can get TV? There always will be. Our focus is, maybe steal an old tagline from HBO, it's not HBO, it's TV. And I think that it's important for us to remember that we're not going to change the way people watch TV. People may change what they want and how they get it, but you still have to have a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that people will watch, and that's where our focus is. Where we find them, we'll find them. When our distributors ask us to try and do some short form, we'll try it for them, and we'll see if it can work. But we're focused on television and telling good stories.
Great. Dale or Dave, any other sort of reality checks that you might propose introducing to this discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Stan 100%. Content is king. I mean, it's an old saying, but it's true. If the content compels viewership, you're going to be okay. And that's, we look at some of our most successful shows, are shows that are timeless, that have been around for 30 or 40 years. I mean, we had a dilemma not too long ago where we were, contemplating whether or not we'd put on a black and white episode of Gunsmoke, and we were just pulling our hair out, and do we really want to go here? We're going to be considered classic. Is this ever going to get a rating? The ratings came in the first week. We were like, I cannot believe this is pulling these kind of ratings. I mean, we've, using classic shows that people appreciate the content, as Stan said, beginning, a middle, and an end. We've been able to keep ratings, keep ourselves in the top 25. So I think Stan's right. There is a real drive for content, and that's what the future is always going to be. And they might watch it on different platforms, but it starts and ends with content.
And am I right that Gunsmoke was one of those famous shows that started out black and white and went to color fairly early on in the transition? So that's kind of a big, before and after Gunsmoke went to color was a big thing when I was a kid.
Yep, and we've been fortunate to be able to air both versions, and both do very well.
Great.
Yeah, for us, you know, the big thing that we we frankly are paranoid by and wake up thinking about every day is, you know, when will an Amazon or a Netflix or an Apple come in and buy like a really meaningful sports package and put it exclusively on their platform. And you know, if you were to not know anything about the industry and read analyst reports, you would think, you know, that everything's going to fall off a cliff and that's going to happen. And you know, Apple can afford to buy every NFL package that exists and not have it really be a blip on their radar. The reality is that, you know, that hasn't really happened yet. Some of the leagues have tried to bifurcate rights and have sold some small packages to Amazon, if you think about Thursday Night Football in the NFL. But it really doesn't register in terms of where the audience is coming from. You know, the leagues would take a massive risk on if they were to put their content exclusively on one of those platforms. You know, the traditional ecosystem still has the most power. And I think the example I like to use, not to pick on a sport, but if you think about boxing in this country, 30 or 40 years ago, it was the most popular sport that existed. And over time, they made a decision to essentially go exclusively behind a pay-per-view paywall. And you know, how many people in the room could really name more than 2 or 3 boxers that exist? They make a lot of money, but I would argue that, you know, boxing as a sport is nowhere near as relevant as others, like the NFL, that's really benefited from the reach of broadcast television. They made a decision, the NFL did, to really elevate broadcast television as their platform of choice. There is, you know, a package on ESPN. But you know, I would argue a main reason that the NFL is the most popular sport in this country is because of the power of broadcast television.
Because you always hear, someday we're going to have this football package where you get to pick your camera angle, and if you just want to watch the left tackle for 60 minutes, you'll be able to
And
do
that exists now. I mean, if you were to watch it on our authenticated NBC Sports Live content, our app, you can select all cams, and we do that on a lot of our properties, and that's one of the reasons why people choose to watch on a device or a connected TV device, and you know, that can exist within sort of the traditional ecosystem. A lot of people just don't know that.
Excellent. So I'd love to swing a little bit to the relationship that you have with your distributors and some of the things that in 2018 you feel like are the most important or the most valuable for you to be doing to really make sure that that relationship is everything that it can be, that you're helping them bring in the maximum number of viewers for your product. And I know, maybe let's start with Dale, because I know INSP does some really interesting boots on the ground, to make a bad pun, kinds of things.
We do. We're a firm believer in supporting all of our distributors with whatever marketing initiatives that we can come up with together. So our marketing team is on the road probably literally 48 weekends out of 52 a year, going to different events, sponsoring different booths at different places, and just working on that relationship to help bring viewers in. And that's an important part. We've done some exclusive movie showings with some of our movie properties. And a lot of times it's just coming to a festival and helping drive that traffic. But I think we feel like that's one thing we can do to really be a partner. And that partnership is what drives it. I mean, for us, the other part of it, again, is we have a viewer base that's very loyal to linear. So, in terms of retention efforts, it's a great for them to have INSP, because INSP will keep a lot of that audience with them. And so, by kind of laying out those statistics and sharing the facts with them about that, and then, again, supporting all these events, we found it's been great working.
And I've been curious, Dale, do you find there are kind of surprising pockets of great interest in INSP? People, who knew that this many people in New Jersey are fascinated with the life of cowboys or things like that?
Yeah, we have. I mean, for sure. And it really, I would say that our strength probably starts in the Baltimore, West Virginia and kind of swings down, swings through the south and out into the west. But we find pockets all over, where it might be in New Hampshire, or it might be in Michigan. And it's always interesting to us to try to understand what's driving viewers there. As our Senior Vice President of Distribution shared yesterday, I mean, our viewers are kind of an interesting breed. When they're not watching INSP, the show they watch the most is Worldwide Wrestling. So if you can get your arms around that, you try to pick your pockets from that. It's a challenge, but
Wrestling bulls is like wrestling wrestlers, I guess.
apparently.
And Stan, what would you say are some of the things you find are working the best for maximizing that relationship between Reels and the distributors?
Well, first of all, it's a hard time to be an independent. There's no question about that. There's a lot of pressure. All the systems, the big MVPTs, the small ones to cut costs, and the easy targets are the independents. I think we have to always try to be smarter, more aggressive, invest in our product, believe in ourselves. And when a distributor asks us for help, look, we're not going to be the one that can cough up the most money, but hopefully we can cough up some of the smartest ideas that can help them on the ground, that can help them on air and do things. And it's, I come to this business having been a distributor myself. When we had USSB, remember, we shared a system with DirecTV. We had 15% of the channel capacity. We were probably the first place where people could subscribe to Showtime or HBO without first subscribing through a big basic package. And I'll tell you, we had 60% penetration with HBO and over 50% with Showtime. They were remarkable numbers and huge numbers of people. And we looked at those relationships with those programmers as real partnerships. So when we came as a programmer now, we really were surprised by some of the animosity it feels between the programmers and the distributors. Because our approach is the more we can do together, the better we can be, the better we can serve the viewers and the subscribers, and the better everyone's business is. And that's the approach that we continue to try to take and live it every day. And we always look at ourselves and say, how can we help our distributors more? Because that's how we get better.
Now, Dave, everybody loves NBC. Everybody has to have NBC Sports, and there's at least one cable MSO that, of course, is always going to carry you. So you never have to sell NBC Sports to anybody, do you?
I wish everybody loved NBC. There's always some people that don't. As you might imagine, we do a lot together with Comcast. But I would say, we do a lot with other MVPDs as well. I think with Comcast, the best example is, the kind of content that was available on X1 during the Olympics. It was very easy to find things that maybe weren't even available on digital television that were, on our only available digitally, but within the authenticated universe. But if you were, you could voice into the X1 remote, anything, an athlete, an event, and even if it wasn't on TV, you could find it very easily on X1, and that was pretty cool. And we saw, in Comcast markets, an over-indexing of the audience for the Olympics. But if you think about like the broader ecosystem, we've got a great partnership with DirecTV where we're pushing the envelope on 4K production. So, going into next season, all of our Notre Dame home games, if you're a DirecTV subscriber, will be available on DirecTV's proprietary 4K channel. So it's things like that where, technically we've pushed the envelope in partnership with distributors, because sports tends to lead the way, I think, on a lot of that, technical innovation, and we try to do it in partnership with the MVPDs.
Great. I want to be sure to leave some time for questions from this heroic group of people who got up at 8 a.m. after the clam bake, but maybe just one more question from me, a little more personally. Looking ahead to the next 20 years of this business, if you're giving advice to a younger person who's thinking about, based on what I've learned in my career in this business, how do I prepare myself to go with where this very dynamic industry is going and succeed and move up?
Yeah, for me, the key thing that's really worked for me and what I tell people is just be intellectually curious, right? This business changes so fast. Like 6 months ago was even a lot different than it is today. and read a lot, ask questions. Like, just don't settle for the status quo way of looking at things, or you'll be left behind. I have a team of people that do that with me, and that's really how we're successful in being partners to the people that run the business and not just bookkeepers. It's intellectual curiosity, it's challenging the status quo, and I don't think you can be successful in this business without doing that.
Great.
Yeah, so I would certainly adopt all of that, and I would say, just by way of story, there's a great special on the Eagles. And during the special, Joe Walsh says, it's funny, when you're going through life, it's just like chaos and anarchy the whole time, and you can't, all these pieces are all around, and you just feel like you can't take it. And then, you get kind of to the end, you turn around and look back, and you see how every single thing had its piece, and it comes together like a novel, and it fits really well. And I think sometimes in the industry, it feels that way. We're kind of overwhelmed with all these technologies, and what do we do? But I think sometimes if you kind of sit back, and Michael Jordan used to say when the pressure got really, really bad, he would just kind of slow it down for a minute and kind of survey the court and figure out his next move. So I think we got to be nimble. You have to see where the future is going, but you also want to watch how things are playing out and where those pieces come together. And you want to be careful that you're not forcing things, because more often than not, if you're combined with intellectual curiosity, if you're observing how it's coming together and finding out how you can flow in that mix. And look, it's a service business, it's an entertainment business. Start with how are we going to entertain? And if you have that as your driving force, I think the rest of it can come together.
And Stan?
Well, I think about this every day. We're a family business. We go back to 1923 when my grandfather started his first radio station, WAMD, where all Minneapolis dances. And so when we think of things, 15 or 20 years is short term for us. We do think generationally, and we do think about how do we bring new generations into the business. So it's a relatively easy question, and there's no silver bullet for how do you get to success. But I think the things that we try to instill in future generations in a family business is always do the right thing, right? Be fair, be honest, even if you don't have to be. If you're doing a deal, look at it from the other side. Would you feel good about it if you were sitting on the other side? If you don't, fix the deal. Make it work, but do the right thing. Don't chase things that don't work, and always think ahead and learn from your mistakes.
Be curious, don't freak out, be honest. It's great advice. I love it. Any questions from out here to add to the conversation?
Dave, just regarding sports, I'm a big sports fan. I look at all the rising salaries, paying ratings slightly, and what I would consider perhaps to be unsustainable programming fees as we continue to look at the sports world. I think there's going to be at some point inevitably a sea change in how we look at sports and programming fees and all that goes with it.
I knew somebody was going to ask that question. I hope so. I think we're in a period right now where there haven't been a lot of rights expiring, and frankly, the last 2 years have not gone as I would have expected, because I think the flattening to declining sort of linear ratings isn't totally new. I mean, it's something that's been happening. I think some sports networks have lost subs at a greater rate than other networks. Not all sports networks, but some, particularly the single sport networks. And so you ask, like, how can rights costs continue to double and triple in that environment? And frankly, we thought the Big Ten was one that happened over a year ago. More recently, the UFC and WWE, we thought those would have modest increases. And in the case of the WWE, it tripled. In the case of Big Ten, it tripled, and UFC doubled. So we were wrong. I think it's a little bit of an irrational marketplace, right? And so long as there's one or two irrational players for whatever reason, you know, that will persist. You know, I don't think that will last forever. And when you do get into the early 2020s, there are a lot of rights expiring at the same time. And there's no way one irrational competitor can buy everything, right? If they do, we'll wish them luck. And we're fortunate to be a large, diversified company that has other successful businesses. And I'm not saying we're going to get out of the sports business. I'm just saying we're going to have to make some tough decisions because we won't pay 3 or 4 times, you know, for what will likely be the same revenue stream. So I think that's what's behind the majority of the recent rights increases. It's an irrational marketplace. And if you look at internationally, you know, the EPL, the Premier League Soccer in the UK, which is essentially their NFL in that territory, actually what did go down. And the reason it went down is it wasn't an irrational marketplace. It was only one bidder. The 2 bidders essentially got together in that market and bid together on that property, and it went down 20%. So it can happen. It just really has to do with the market dynamics.
One more, maybe? I'll look around. Great. Tim or Paul? Turn it back to Tim Wilkerson.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you to our panelists. Thank you to all of the brave souls out there this morning. We really appreciate it. And I just want to say one thing. Really, what I find in my 2 years at NECTA is this convention is really remarkable that, as Dale was explaining about pieces coming together, the television side, the broadband side, the government side, the 3 legs of a stool. And I think we do it remarkably well. And I really appreciate, and Paul as well, and Mark Riley, our board chair, and John Sudich, our convention chair. We really appreciate your support. And to be able to draw luminaries like this, I think speaks volumes about our commitment and what all of us do together. That's why 50 years coming together. So we appreciate it. Have a wonderful day and enjoy the rest of the programming.
Great.